The encounter. The bazaar above Orris IV smelled of burnt ozone and desperation. Daniel Kane stepped off his freighter into a half-lit concourse, boots thudding on metal plates that had been patched and repatched over the years. A few vendors slouched behind stalls, their displays a pitiful mix of cracked machinery, dull gemstones, and wilted vegetation. The station's air scrubbers coughed every few minutes, and somewhere in the distance a child cried, thin, hollow, hopeless. Kane had seen struggling colonies before, but this was different. The people here didn't just look hungry, they looked beaten. He made his way toward Dockmaster's row, the crate of surplus ration packs slung over his shoulder drawing a few hungry stares. He wasn't here on charity, just passing through after a courier run, but he knew he could trade food for spare parts if the right hands were involved. He was almost to the docking office when she stepped into his path. The alien woman was tall, almost his height, with a willowy frame of pale green chitin dulled to a sickly gray. Her black compound eyes reflected the dim station lights in fractured glimmers. Wrapped in a tattered cloak, she clutched something close to her chest. No, not something, two somethings. Broodlings. They were the size of human toddlers, their small exoskeletons still soft in places, their limbs trembling. One of them made a faint clicking noise, weak and uneven. "Human," she said in halting trade standard. Her voice had a rasp to it, as though speaking hurt. "Food for them." She gestured to the broodlings, then lowered her head. "I will do anything." Kane blinked. He'd dealt with the Chrr'ith species before, and he knew their cultural pride ran deep. They didn't beg. Not ever. Asking for help from an outsider was considered a disgrace. Behind him, a wiry merchant muttered in disgust. "She's lost all honor." Kane shifted the ration crate to one hand. "You from the colony?" She nodded once, quickly. "Husband is dead. Famine. No credits." Her gaze flicked toward the crate in his arms. The broodling's eyes tracked it too, their antennae twitching faintly at the scent of protein bars sealed inside. He could have walked past. He could have told himself it wasn't his problem. But the truth was, Kane hated bullies, and famine, 9 times out of 10, was just slow-motion bullying by someone with more resources. He crouched, set the crate down, and popped the seal. "Here," he said, handing her 2 ration packs. "They'll keep a few days on these. Longer if you stretch 'em." Her clawed hands trembled as she accepted them. She murmured something in Chrr'ith. The translator implant in Kane's ear lagged a moment before producing the phrase, "Life debt is sworn." He frowned. "That's not necessary." "It is law," she said simply. "I will work. Clean. Carry. Anything. Life debt binds me until repaid." Kane sighed. He'd never been a fan of ritual obligations, but refusing outright would just humiliate her further. "Fine," he said. "You and the kids can stay aboard my ship tonight. Safer than the docking ring." Her head lifted a fraction, surprise flickering in those black eyes. "Gratitude, human Kane." "Just Kane," he said, leading the way back toward Dock 7. That night, the freighter's mess smelled faintly of Chrr'ith spices as she mixed ration paste with the last of her own provisions for the broodlings. Kane sat in the cockpit, half listening to the distant soft clicks of the children eating. Through the ship's thin walls came the low hum of station gossip, loud enough to catch a few words. Syndicate. Blockade. Taxes. Starvation. He leaned back in his chair, scowling. Orris IV's famine wasn't an accident. Someone was keeping these people hungry on purpose. In the dim reflection of the viewport, Kane saw the alien widow in the doorway, her broodlings huddled close. She met his gaze with quiet resolve. She had begged him once today. He had a feeling she would never do it again. The debt. By morning, the broodlings had more color in their shells, and their movements were less sluggish. Kane found one of them perched on the edge of a crate, turning a bolt over in tiny claws, clicking to itself. The other sat cross-legged on the deck, tracing shapes in the dust with the tip of an antenna. Vrasha, that was her name, he learned, was already awake, cleaning the ship's maintenance bay with a rag that had seen better decades. She worked with a quiet precision, no wasted motions, as though the act itself was a kind of meditation. "You don't have to do that," Kane said from the hatch. Her head tilted, antennae flicking. "Life debt requires usefulness." Brood must see mother's honor restored. Kane didn't argue. There was no point. He knew enough about Chrr'ith customs to understand that refusing her work would be like refusing a handshake back home, an insult, not kindness. They shared breakfast in the mess, protein strips for him, rehydrated grain paste for her and the broodlings. She didn't waste words, but slowly, between bites, the story came out. Her mate, Chrr'ith, had been part of Orris IV's agricultural guild. When the famine hit, the guild tried to barter with off-world merchants, but the Vorn Syndicate swooped in first. They seized the orbital docks, taxed every incoming shipment until nothing was left, and sold what food remained at impossible prices. Anyone who resisted was removed. "Your mate?" Kane asked. Her mandibles tightened. "Killed when he refused to surrender seed stock. Syndicate made example." She looked down at her broodlings. "We hid in warrens. Few survived. No work. No food." Kane had heard of the Vorn Syndicate, a cross-species cartel with a nasty reputation, smuggling, slavery, protection rackets. Not the sort you could just scare off with a few warning shots. After breakfast, Kane headed to the docking concourse to trade the rest of his ration crate for ship fuel. Vrasha insisted on coming, the broodlings trailing behind. That's when trouble stepped in front of them. He was human, but barely recognizable under the chrome plating and polymer grafts. A thick ridge of scar tissue split his shaved scalp, and his left eye glowed faint red. The logo etched into his shoulder plating, a snarling beast's head, was pure Syndicate branding. "Captain Kane," the cyborg drawled, his voice a metallic purr. "Name's Gareth Voss. I hear you've been feeding strays." Kane kept his face blank. "I hear you need a better hobby." Voss's grin widened. "This station's under Vorn protection. Anyone handing out food without our cut is making enemies." His gaze flicked to Vrasha. "And harboring debt slaves? That's a dangerous habit." "She's not a slave," Kane said flatly. "Life debt, slave, semantics. Same chain around the neck." Voss stepped closer, just enough for Kane to smell the faint tang of synthetic lubricants in his augments. "Consider this a friendly warning, pilot. You keep your nose out of our business, and we'll let you leave with your skin intact." Kane didn't reply. He just stared until Voss gave a mock salute and walked off, his footsteps ringing against the deck plates. Vrasha's antennae were stiff with alarm. "Syndicate marks prey before the hunt," she said quietly. "Now you are marked." Back aboard the freighter, Kane called in a favor through his ship's comms, an old Navy buddy still running cargo runs for the Terran fleet. The reply came quick and blunt. "Orris IV's outside our protection zone. No fleet presence. Syndicate's got the place locked down tight. Nothing we can do without starting a war." Kane killed the channel and stared at the blinking cursor on his NAV display. He had options. He could cut loose now, leave before the Syndicate decided to collect on that mark. It would be the smart move. But every time he glanced toward the cargo bay, he saw those two small Chrr'ith faces looking up at him, and his gut turned sour. That night, Vrasha spoke first. "Life debt is heavy," she said, her voice low. "But heavier still is the debt I owe my people. If I cannot repay you, then I will fight beside you." Kane leaned back in his chair. "You don't owe me a thing." She met his gaze, unblinking. "Then perhaps we owe them a fight." Kane felt a slow, dangerous grin tug at the corner of his mouth. He'd been trying to avoid trouble his whole life. Maybe it was time to stop running. The plan. Kane didn't sleep much after that. Instead, he sat in the cockpit, tapping through old contact lists and black market NAV maps. Every so often, he'd glance toward the cargo bay, where Vrasha slept lightly with her broodlings curled against her side. The quiet chitter of their breathing was steady now, a small improvement, but it told him they weren't as close to starvation as they had been 2 days ago. The problem was, if the Syndicate controlled Orris IV's food supply, a couple of ration packs wouldn't change much. They'd need something bigger. By morning, Kane had an idea, reckless, half-formed, but possible. He spread a battered holomap across the mess table. Vrasha stood opposite him, antennae tilting toward the glowing blue projections. "These," Kane said, highlighting 3 blinking points, "are off-grid storage sites. Old smuggler caches. The Syndicate uses them to stash food they've stolen before it goes to market. You know their locations? She asked. Not all. But I know a guy who does. He leaned back. If we hit one of those, we could move enough food to keep your colony alive for months. Vrasha's gaze narrowed. They will guard them. That's why we don't go in loud, Kane said. We go in smart. She didn't answer right away. Her culture valued direct assaults, victory through strength. But Kane could see the calculation in her eyes. Strength alone hadn't saved Orris IV before. Within hours, they were en route to a dusty rock of a moon called Pleads III. Kane's old smuggler contact, Rook, operated out of a half-buried cargo hauler there. Rook didn't trust easily, but Kane came bearing a case of contraband whiskey, which opened the door. Rook was a squat, four-armed Thalari with a scar across his snout and a permanent look of boredom. Vorn's got half the sector sewn up tight, he said after Kane explained. But yeah, I know where they're keeping the good stuff. He keyed up a file on the console, grainy sensor scans of a Syndicate freighter docked in a canyon-side depot on Orris IV's second moon. This one's their mid-tier stash. Not the motherlode, but big enough to matter. Security's a few hired guns and a couple of drones. Easy in, if you're not stupid. Define not stupid, Kane said dryly. Not flying straight in through the front gate. Back aboard the freighter, Kane laid out the approach. They'd land on the far side of the moon, cross the canyon on foot under cover of the local dust storms, then cut through a maintenance hatch Rook had flagged on the depot schematics. Vrasha studied the plan in silence, then asked, "And if they see us?" Kane shrugged. "Then we improvise." She clicked her mandibles, a Chrr'ith sound somewhere between frustration and amusement. Humans and your improvisation. Hey, it works. The next 2 days were spent preparing. Kane tuned up the freighter's engines for a quick getaway. Vrasha, drawing on her colony's old militia training, modified a set of shock rifles for better close-quarters performance. The broodlings, too young to fight, kept themselves busy, or so Kane thought, until he caught them in the engine room rewiring a diagnostic unit into a crude jamming device. Vrasha explained without embarrassment. Chrr'ith children learn to solve problems early. It is survival. Kane grinned. Remind me never to play cards with them. When the day came, the plan went smoother than he'd dared hope. They touched down on the far side of the moon under a curtain of dust storms, visibility near zero. The march across the canyon floor was slow. Kane's visor scraped grit from the air while Vrasha's exoskeleton took the brunt of the wind. The depot loomed ahead, a squat, ugly structure built into the canyon wall. The maintenance hatch was just where Rook had said it would be. Kane popped the seal with a portable cutter, and they slipped inside. The interior smelled faintly of metal and stored grain. No alarms yet. Moving through shadowed corridors, they found the main storage chamber, stacked high with sealed food crates stamped with the Syndicate's emblem. "That's a lot of mouths fed," Kane murmured. Vrasha's antennae twitched. "Too many for us to carry." "We don't have to," Kane said, pulling a small beacon from his pack. "We just have to let the right people know where to find it." They tagged the location and slipped out the way they came, just as a patrol drone hummed into the corridor they'd vacated. By the time Syndicate guards found the beacon and realized what it was broadcasting, every colony within comm range had the coordinates. The food would be gone before the Syndicate could stop it. Back aboard the freighter, Vrasha allowed herself the smallest of smiles. "A small victory," she said. Kane leaned back in his chair, already thinking of the next target. Small victories add up. The stand. The Syndicate didn't take long to respond. Within a week of the food cache raid, Orris IV was crawling with mercenaries. Patrol ships prowled the orbital lanes. Kane's freighter was flagged on every station manifest, and every Syndicate lookout had his picture. The message from Voss came 2 days later, a hollow transmission hijacked onto Kane's comms. Voss's augmented face leered out of the static. "You embarrassed me, Kane. I don't like being embarrassed. You've got one chance to walk away. Leave the Chrr'ith and get out of my sector, or I start making examples." Kane didn't reply. Instead, he killed the feed and turned to Vrasha. "Time to go big." She studied him with those unreadable black eyes. "The central depot." He nodded. "You said it yourself. The Syndicate bleeds your world by controlling all the food. We take the depot, we break their chokehold. They spent 3 days preparing. Kane rerouted every scrap of auxiliary power into the freighter's engines and shields. Vrasha and her fighters, now a small but determined band of Chrr'ith from Orris IV, retrofitted the cargo bay with makeshift barricades and hidden compartments for smuggled weapons. The plan was audacious: approach the Syndicate's heavily fortified depot as a surrender shipment, pretending to be hauling contraband as tribute. Once inside, they'd lock down the loading bay, cut the depot's comms, and open the food vaults for broadcast coordinates. On the 4th day, the freighter glided toward the depot, a massive, slab-sided structure clinging to the edge of Orris IV's orbit like a tumor. Automated turrets tracked their approach but didn't fire. Their forged transponder codes were working. Inside the loading bay, Syndicate guards in mismatched armor waved them in. Kane disembarked with exaggerated slowness, hands visible. Vrasha's fighters moved in pairs, heads bowed to sell the surrender. The moment the bay doors sealed behind them, Kane dropped the act. "Now," he said into his comm. Hidden charges detonated at the bay's locking mechanisms, welding the doors shut. Vrasha's fighters surged forward, shock rifles humming. Kane sprinted for the control tower at the bay's edge, taking the stairs 2 at a time. A guard stepped into his path, human, young, scared. Kane slammed him into the wall and kept moving. The tower's main console was old but familiar enough. He killed the internal comms and disabled the turret controls in 30 seconds flat. That's when Voss appeared. He strode into the loading bay, armor gleaming under the depot lights, a shock maul crackling in his hand. "I told you what would happen if you didn't walk away," he said. Kane dropped from the tower's last step, landing hard. "Yeah, you did. I just didn't care." Voss came at him fast, faster than a man his size should move. Kane ducked the first swing, felt the Mul's energy crackle against the air beside his ear, and countered with a punch to Voss's jaw. It was like hitting a bulkhead. The fight was brutal, close quarters. Voss fought with the precision of someone who'd been trained and upgraded for it. Kane fought dirty, elbow to the throat, knee to the ribs, a blinding kick to the shin actuator that made Voss stagger. "You think charity wins wars?" Voss snarled, swinging again. "No," Kane said, catching the Mul's haft and wrenching it aside. "People do." With a final heave, he drove Voss back into a stack of crates. The Mul clattered away. Vrasha was suddenly there, shock rifle aimed at Voss's head. Voss froze. Kane didn't bother finishing him. The fight was already won. In the vault chamber, row upon row of sealed food containers stretched into the distance. Kane keyed his beacon and sent the coordinates across every open comm channel in the sector. By the time Syndicate reinforcements arrived, half the colonies in range would be on their way to claim their share. Vrasha stood beside him, antennae lifted in something like awe. "With this, they cannot starve us again." "Not if we keep hitting them," Kane said. They left the depot in chaos, not destroyed, but gutted of its leverage. As the freighter broke orbit, Kane caught sight of dozens of civilian craft streaming toward the depot's docking bays, hungry worlds coming to take back what was theirs. In the mess hall, Vrasha placed a clawed hand on his forearm. "Life debt is fulfilled, Kane. But Chrr'ith law says one who saves your people is blood family." He smirked. "Guess that makes me Sky Uncle for real, then." The broodlings chittered in agreement from their seats, and Kane set the freighter's course for the next colony on the Syndicate's map. Trouble would be waiting. So would they.